Okay, so just out on the Benelli TRK 502, it's Benelli's 500cc parallel twin, putting out 47 brake horsepower in the UK, making that A2 compliant. It's Benelli's, I guess, new middleweight bike, came out in 2017. It's Benelli's. Benelli are an Italian company that got into bed with the Chinese. The Chinese provide the manufacturing infrastructure, I guess the funding, and the access to markets over in the Far East. Whilst the Italians, Benelli, they provide the brand name, the heritage, the engineering expertise, etc. to the Chinese. So it's a sort of a symbiotic relationship where both benefit from being in bed with each other. So yeah, it's an interesting bike. Very surprised by it. I was expecting it to be quite awful, to be honest. It's on paper it's 235 kilos, though it does seem there's some disagreement about that, and that it might actually be 213 kilos. It is at either of those weights still slightly on the porky side. It's certainly got a little bit of weight when you rock it off the stand. You know, for a 500cc bike, it does surprise you with how slightly weighty it is, but then how big it is as well. It's certainly mimicking the size of the larger capacity adventure machines. So it sat next to a GS 1200. It's almost the same size. It almost fits in the same silhouette. And I think the designers have artificially pumped up the bodywork and the tank fairing and the screen to give it the size of a bigger machine. Why they've done that, I think largely for the emerging markets where it's going to be sold, such as in the Far East, in Malaysia, etc., where I gather it's doing quite well. I think by giving it the puffed up size of a large bike, then it just gives it that extra cachet, brand prestige, the bigger the better type mentality perhaps. In the UK, that's probably a little bit of a surprising technique, especially compared to a CB500X by Honda, which is its most natural competitor. The 500X, I've got one behind me actually in my rear view mirror, who I'm riding with today, and it's the Honda is notably slimmer and smaller. The Honda weighs about 20 kilos less on paper, although you have to say with the Benelli you get a lot of kit included as standard, and that really bumps up the weight. So such things as crash bars, a rear rack, a larger fairing, what else has it got, pannier frames, all come as standard. So when you factor in they'll probably weigh about 10 kilos altogether, then it suggests that the difference between the actual bike weight of a Honda CB500X and the Benelli is about 10 kilos, so not that much, to be honest. I think what's surprising about the Benelli is the engine. It's such a lovely, smooth revving, strong pulling unit. I don't know where they pulled it from. I think it's their own design, but it's fantastically smooth and tractable. So fifth gear, sixth gear. Well, I'm in fourth now, but let's go up to sixth, doing 40 miles an hour. Slight incline. Revs are at 3,000 RPM. Open that up. That pulls really cleanly and nicely. Strong surge coming in about 4.5, 5,000 revs. It's starting to pull quite hard. Up to 6. So that's pulling quite strong there. It does get a bit buzzy about 6.5 to the red line, but it is a fresh engine. It's done 689 miles, so that might excuse the slight rush, the buzziness of the top end rush. But the bike will seem to cruise happily at sort of 85, 90 on the motorway. At 70, it's more than relaxed. I like the fact that it's got a 20 litre tank. I think that's biggest in class. The CB500X has got 17.5 litres. Also the seat height's a little bit lower at 800 millimeters on the Benelli. It probably doesn't give you as much payoff as you'd like for the fact that the seat is quite wide, so if you're short in the leg you're still possibly going to have a little bit of a reach down, just because the saddle width is that little bit broader than the Honda. But the seat feels really comfortable, and actually I quite like the big bike feel of it. As I look down now, I've got nice upswept handlebars like you would on a GS 1200. You've got a big screen, handguards come as standard, you've got a big flared tank, Obviously, again, it's a lot of this will be plastic clad in this tank wheel. There won't be a lot behind it. There'll just be nothing but air and fasteners, I would imagine. But it does give the sense of being on a bigger bike. And I think for the kudos that gives you in the emerging markets, that'll probably be a good thing. The weight of the bike means that it's quite planted. I think the handling's quite nice. It's quite firm suspension, upside down front forks. It's quite on the firm side, but then it's not too firm. 17-inch front wheel means it'll turn in quite nicely, move around quite sharply. The bike remains flat under braking and under acceleration. Fuel ranges are going to be about 240, 250 miles. The price is probably the best thing at £5,000. I mean, you're getting a brand new adventure bike, adventure style bike, because we better say that this bike is in no way means shape or form an off-road bike. You would never take this bike off-roaded, just because of the 17-inch front wheel size, really, and the weight of it. But for £5,000 for an adventure style machine, which actually looks quite, well, to some eyes, quite good, then it's kind of hard to fault. Is it the perfect machine? Is it as good as a Honda CB500X? It's actually very close, and in some ways better, especially on the road. It's probably a more dynamically engaging on-road bike than a Honda, and it's £1,000 less. Now, you know, the Chinese with the amalgamation of the European brands, like has happened with SWM and Shinere, it's starting to really bear good fruit, to be honest, because the Chinese are getting the European flair, the European styling, the European know-how, and it's just meaning that the European brands such as Benelli SWM can compete again in terms of price and manufacturing capacity, because there's no way Benelli would be able to build a £5,000 bike on its own without China. Now, let's bear in mind, bikes like the F850 new BMW, their engines are made in China. The G310 GS BMW is made in India. So when we say a Chinese bike, well, it's not quite as cut and dry as that, because a lot of the European prestige bikes and brands are now reliant on China and developing countries to build their bikes. So does it matter if the money and the ownership is actually Chinese? Probably not, really, as long as the quality of the bike's there. And I think for the first time, this kind of operation with the Chinese involvement has built a bike which is pretty much as good as the Japanese stuff, especially with the Japanese sort of downgrading their quality, eking out their profits as they are. I get a feeling that the gap is almost there, because this bike is good. You know, it's not going to float everyone's boat. 47 brake horsepower, 220 brake, 220 kilo, whatever it's probably going to be. It's not going to float everyone's boat. But I tell you what, it rides well, and if you got on that bike, you could take two up. Panniers are a £500 option. There's going to be a 19-inch spoke front wheel option coming along later this year for another £500 or £600. You know, £5,000 for that massive lump of metal and plastic. I can't really find fault. I really can't. Good bike. And I'm not biased because I've got no Chinese heritage or Italian. So the only thing I'd say, why did they make the engine guards quite so wide? Because they won't fit through a gate, and that's slightly annoying. So yeah, Benelli TRK 502, not bad at all.